Good evening. I welcome everyone to the February 28th regular board meeting. Thank you for joining us. We will open the meeting with the Pledge of Allegiance. Thank you. Esta junta se llevará a cabo en inglés, pero contamos de servicio de traducción si alguien gusta hacer un comentario público o recibir explicaciones en español. Por favor, indique su necesidad. Should anyone wish to participate in the citizens' comment portion of the meeting, you may still sign up by completing a form at the entrance of the room and turning it in to Kim White. Virtual attendees have had the opportunity to complete the form online before the meeting. First on the agenda, we have the consent agenda. This consent agenda includes the February 8th special meeting minutes, February 9th special meeting minutes, the February 13th workshop minutes, and the February 14th regular meeting minutes, as well as vouchers and payroll, personnel report, the surplus report, contracts, field trips, multi-learner plan, and the financial report. Do I have a motion to approve the consent agenda?
Move to approve the consent agenda.
I'll second.
Thank you. We have a motion by Julie, seconded by Catherine. Do we have any discussion? I will like to just briefly touch base on a brief discussion I had with Superintendent Bill Eagle in regards to the multilingual learners plan, which is also more commonly known as our English language learner plan, which is going to be submitted to OSPI later this month or next month, I guess. I see after reviewing the plan, I just see a really big need to have a very strategic plan in regards to our English language learners. I have requested that we have a board workshop to look at the data as good or bad, ugly as it may be. Unfortunately, our numbers are a bit disproportionate in regards to how the district is representing in regards to our English language learners. OSPI has all this data, but just briefly, 34.4% of our English language learners are on track to graduate, only 34%, which is incredibly low. And unfortunately, it has been this low for many years. Also, based on OSPI data, we have almost a little bit under 1,100 students with disability, in which 417 of our ELLs are duly qualified for both programs. And this is also concerning in addition to the data. So I have requested that we look at the data and the district in hopes to develop a strategic plan. And I know Superintendent Eagle has been supportive and hopefully we can lay the groundwork for the incoming superintendent.
And I might thank you for putting the spotlight on that area. And I think that's an excellent idea to have a workshop and focus attention on it.
Thank you. Any further discussion? Okay, thank you.
I will just add on that OSPI just completed a review of our program and we had an initial meeting with OSPI today. They reviewed several of our programs, including the bilingual program, and had some recommendations for us moving forward that we're going to be looking at closely over the next few weeks. And I'm looking forward to a board workshop where we can dig into the data in detail and set forth a plan that can be a footprint for someone to step into moving forward.
Thank you. If there's no further discussion, all in favor of adopting the consent agenda as presented?
Aye.
Aye. Motion carries. Next up is citizens' comments. And I believe we do have citizen comment, Kim.
Yes, we do. Keena Taylor is first up.
Okay. And just a reminder, each person is, we will limit to 3 minutes. Kim will keep a timer to keep track, help us keep track of the time. And if you could please state your name before your comment.
Good evening. My name is Keena Taylor.
So, hello again. Raising a child with special needs has led to a lot of long nights, days, years. But these last 2 weeks have been particularly hard for us as a family. We spent the last 2 weeks advocating for not only our family, but other families with special needs that are too exhausted to do it for themselves. This exhaustion comes from constantly advocating for our children in a system that historically does not support us. The exhaustion from having to worry that our children are not receiving services that they have a right to. Exhaustion from navigating a system that's not set up for non-typical families. From facing roadblocks at every step along the way in this school system. In the last 6 months, though, we've actually had the opportunity to breathe and collect ourselves for the first time since our son entered the school district 5 years ago. WIA has provided that for us, along with multiple other families in this district. We don't face the same worries about calls at work multiple times a week that we have to come and pick our kids up. Parents of typical children do not have these same worries. They get called when things are going well or when their children are sick to come pick them up, not because their child's locked in a janitor's closet in a local elementary school. Due to the fact that a team of adults with advanced degrees cannot figure out what to do to prevent locking a child in a closet. We're not having to lead an entire team to provide the education for our child. WIA is doing this for us, with us. They are supporting our children better as a small school than this entire district has done for us in the past. So where do these kids go if WIA is closed? Back into a system that has repeatedly failed us? It is the responsibility of the district to provide free, appropriate public education. For those children with disabilities who attend public schools, this is the cornerstone of special education law. This district is also required to provide the least restrictive environment or provide out-of-district placement. So WIA is doing this for us. I urge you to look at the expense on the district and the families here before you change or remove this school. Thank you.
Thank you, Kina.
Next, we have Denton Meyer.
Hello again. My name is Denton Meyer. Good evening, school board members and executive staff. Please consider the following. Cutting jobs is the last thing anyone wants to do, and this is a tough decision. However, public schools were not created to provide jobs for adults, but to provide a quality education for all children. WIA is the only alternative learning environment of its kind in the Valley and is extremely important. WIA needs to exist as it relates to the existing format for the current children and others to come. There's a lack of general knowledge of the program in the Valley, and every person that I've talked to, when they hear the full picture, are in support of the program and wonder why they and so many others have not heard about it. Every day that we canvass and talk to people, the program gathers more support. Thank you.
Thank you, Denton.
Next is Ellen Bavana.
Hi, my name is Ellen Bavona. There have been many discussions here about being fiscally responsible. The point I would like to highlight and remind you of is the responsibility to the children, the moral, ethical, and need I remind you, the legal responsibility to all the children in the Valley. Not just the typical students who can have who can hack public school and evade bullying by peers and teachers alike, not just the atypical students whose 504 and IEP accommodations actually work for them. It is the school district's responsibility to provide free access to public education to all. By eradicating WIA, that access will be lost to so many students and families who have tried and been failed by the district in multiple settings. WIA is a unique environment where kids with a variety of different needs thrive and together. And most without the help of a para or other ancillary staff, which, by the way, will all cost money over the years. We are here tonight to fight for all the kids and families who have been failed in the past, and these who currently don't have the time or energy to fight now. Taking away WIA today and saying you will replace it in the future does not fulfill your moral and ethical responsibility to the kids that are here now. These that have been failed today by the dismal record of treatment and accommodations for the disabled. This move of getting rid of WIA for the short term savings of single percentages while increasing the long-term cost will place an even larger blemish on the district's shockingly shameful report card of how they treat children with disabilities. I understand people may lose jobs, and I am sorry for that. However, public school is about, most importantly, the children and providing them with the education in a setting they function in. This is our moral responsibility to the children of this valley.
Thank you, Ellen. No virtual comments? Okay, thank you. Next on the agenda, we have a couple action items. The first one is the policy second read.
So we have a couple of policies up for second read, 2411, which is a high school equivalency certificate. There's some updated language there to reflect current regulations. 3421, which is child abuse and neglect, and clarifies mandatory reporting requirements. All our staff are mandatory reporters. 3230 on search and student privacy. The revisions there clarify and reorganize some of the language in the prior policy. 5004 on infection control program, which has removed some language regarding COVID-19 vaccine requirements for staff and added language to the policy that affirms the district will follow legal regulations pertaining to infectious diseases. 5410, which is based on House Bill 1617 that adds Juneteenth as a legal holiday effective July 1st of last year. And then we have a couple of policies, 1112 on director orientation, where we've added some electronic access to some of the records we use for orienting new board members. And just an update on 1310, which is our policy adoption manuals and administrative procedures. Any discussion on those policies for second read?
I'll allow the people who weren't on the members who weren't on the policy committee to add to this, but in the first reading, we made one change to policy 1310 so that the procedures are promptly provided as they're revised to all board members, not just through the policy committee. That's the only change from the first reading. And I wasn't aware of any other discussion, but there may be.
At this time, I will accept a motion.
I'll go first. And I propose that we approve the policies as submitted in the agenda.
Thank you, Martin. Second. And seconded by Laura. Any further discussion? Okay. All in favor of adoption of the policies as presented by Superintendent Eagle?
Aye.
Motion carries. Next on the agenda is the budget scenarios. Bill?
Thank you. I have some slides that I will share, and we'll get those up on the screen for everybody to see. And I'm going to try and run the slides from this seat. I will go ahead and get started. As you're aware, the district is faced with some budget challenges. However, I am confident we can and will move forward with a stronger, more sustainable budget over the next few years. To make this happen, we will work to increase efficiencies throughout the system, reducing our expenses and realigning our staffing levels to our enrollment. As we do this, and that is actually the last slide, we need to be way at the other end there. As we do this, I'm also confident that we can continue to make progress on our strategic plan. We have a goal of ensuring our students are future ready. Students are at the heart of our work, and we will continue to provide outstanding educational opportunities for the students and the families of the Wenatchee Valley. On February 13th, I shared 3 scenarios with you that outline savings targets and staffing level targets for the next 2 years at least. And I would like to review a little bit about those scenarios with you this evening. So as we move into that, just a reminder, we have been following an aggressive timeline for budget planning. And so far, we've stayed on target. We are at step 5 of that process. And so the district is seeking the board's guidance on moving forward with one of 3 potential reduction scenarios. As we move into a review of those scenarios, you will again see a lot of numbers and tables that attempt to help you understand the dollars. However, I know you are all also aware that behind these numbers and scenarios are people, our students, families, and staff. And we recognize moving forward involves some difficult decisions that impact individuals and families. And for that reason, we have attempted to maintain this aggressive timeline and get information out front so that we can prepare to make decisions early, because we want those that are impacted both in and out of our system to have the earliest opportunity to make decisions for themselves and for their families. As part of that budgeting process, we did develop a set of guiding principles. You've seen these a few times. They will be used from year to year as part of our budgeting process, and they do provide a framework to help us focus on the way we allocate dollars in relation to the district's priorities. And in addition to the guiding principles, we also set forward some goals for budgeting. And these goals include things like the use of natural attrition, such as resignations or retirements, to assist in the reduction process. I am currently aware of at least 12 certificated retirements and 9 classified retirements. How those openings that are created by retirements play out in this process depends on several factors. For example, some retirements or resignations may come from positions that we must replace, building principals, certain special education staff, et cetera. Others may come from positions that could possibly be absorbed. So when a vacancy occurs through either a retirement or resignation, we are evaluating the feasibility of not filling the position or potentially filling it from within using our current staff if possible. These goals also outline the need for the timeline that we've undertaken. And again, we did this in order to let people know early about potential impacts. And last, but certainly not least, we have a goal to spread the impact of the reductions across the system and across multiple years. So here's a look at our enrollment and staffing levels over time. And in particular, over the past 3 years, the district saw a pretty significant increase in revenue due to federal ESSER dollars. I use the term ESSER a lot, so I want to say ESSER is Elementary and Secondary Schools Emergency Relief Program. It was money that the district received to help with the pandemic. And the ESSER dollars are going away. They'll be pretty much spent out by the end of this year. A big part of those dollars went into staffing. over the past 3 years. Staff was increased in part in efforts due to keep class sizes lower coming out of the pandemic, but also to provide increasing support for the social, emotional, and behavioral needs of our students. We are, however, now at a point where our staffing levels are not in line with what can be supported by our enrollment. I think it's worth noting in this table in particular that the pre-COVID staffing levels were in the 851 to 867 range. I think that range is important. Each of our budget scenarios represent a path to get closer to that pre-COVID staffing level over the next few years. There we go. We have targeted a preliminary reduction range of $8 to $9 million over the next 2 years. And you could ask, and it's a good question, why such a large range? And really the answer is related to several unknown budget parameters that are going to be part of our budgeting process this year. We know that the federal ESSER dollars will be pretty much spent by the end of the year. And I mentioned earlier, some of those dollars went into staffing. So as the ESSER dollars leave the system, we will need to adjust staffing levels accordingly. We also know, based on prior trends, we are predicting a continued decline in enrollment, which in turn requires staffing adjustment. But there are also several impacts related to legislative sessions that are currently happening, and those impacts are unknown to a large extent at this time. Currently, the governor's budget, for example, contains a 4.5% inflationary price deflator, but the governor's budget proposal is just an opening for lawmakers, so we really don't have an idea where that percentage will land. In addition, the legislature is discussing a potential increase in the base salary for all of our staff, as well as debating the future of regionalization dollars, which we currently receive in our district. Because this year is a long session for lawmakers, they get to argue about this stuff until late April, which also makes it difficult to build some of these unknown factors into our scenarios. For that reason, we're looking at what I will call target savings and target staffing levels in the scenarios. And we built the scenarios without knowing some of these parameters because we wanted to get the information out into the system as early as possible. So we're watching carefully for what the impact of some of these things will be moving forward. With that in mind, the scenarios represent our best approach to savings targets based on our current understanding of the budget parameters we just discussed. But each scenario does provide a reduction amount that gets us into that preliminary $8 to $9 million reduction range. And each scenario encompasses a phased approach that attempts to spread the reductions over at least a 2-year period. There are some similarities in all the scenarios that you will see this evening. They have the same reduction amounts for non-staff related costs, which include things like material supplies and operating costs, our contracted services, and a little bit of time sheeting. The MSOC costs, the values here include reductions in travel and capital outlay, as well as materials, supplies, and operating costs. And these numbers are the same in all the scenarios because we kind of maxed them out. And therefore, we used what we think are going to be the maximum values in each of the scenarios. The non-staff related reductions amount to a little over $1 million in savings over the 2-year time frame. As you've heard, Wenatchee Internet Academy is also a factor in all 3 scenarios. WIA was opened in the 2021 school year in response to the pandemic and was funded almost exclusively with ESSER dollars in 2021 and 21-22. One of the benefits of the pandemic experience is that we learned as a system how to engage students in a different way through online learning. By continuing WIA beyond the pandemic, we have been able to meet a need that we were not otherwise meeting for some students and families. Since its opening in 2021, we have seen a decline in enrollment, and I will share some numbers with you regarding the enrollment at WIA. And in doing that, as I mentioned earlier, it's important to remember when you look at numbers in a table that people are impacted. There are families who have benefited greatly from the WIA opportunity, and we've heard from some of them tonight. The three scenarios I will be reviewing each incorporate a different path forward for WIA. And so before we dig in, let's look at a little bit of information about WIA. Again, I mentioned it was created in the 2021 school year as a response to the pandemic, and enrollment peaked that year in February at about 534 students, which is about the size of one of our middle schools. So for the first 2 years we operated, the funding was almost exclusively provided by ESSER dollars. And as the ESSER dollars are leaving the system, we're increasingly using BEA and categorical dollars to fund WIA. This slide includes what I have for current enrollment and teaching staff at WIA as of the 27th, which was yesterday. We have currently 63 students, although I am aware that there may be some on a waiting list, so that number could be higher. And several of the students in this group of 63 have been involved in WIA for more than 2 years. Of those 63 students, 5 come from outside our district boundaries, from areas like Cashmere and Entiat, Quincy, but also we have a student from Puyallup. The 63 students are served by 5 very talented teachers who run creative programming. In addition to the teaching staff, WIA has an instructional coach who does a lot of things, some administrative support, secretarial support, and some special education support. As with our brick and mortar buildings, we're overstaffed at WIA for the number of students enrolled. We do recognize that WIA has met the needs of students and families enrolled there, and we're working hard to come up with an option for parents that preserves some online learning opportunities folded into one of our existing ALE programs. Our hope is that we can build a hybrid model that would be a viable option and allow for potential growth into a sustainable online option in the future. That's kind of what scenario 2 aims to achieve. So I'll talk about that a little bit more detail in a bit. Hard to see maybe some of the numbers here, but this is a look at the dollar amounts for scenario 1. And you can see in the lower right corner, scenario 1 gets us over that $8 million mark. And here you also see in red the impact of the board's willingness to commit the little more than 2.8 million from our reserves to assist with reductions. That amount keeps us from doing all the reductions in the 23-24 school year, which is very helpful, but then it must become part of reductions in staffing costs in the following year. This slide illustrates the staffing level targets for scenario 1, and there are several assumptions that work into this scenario that I want to explain. So all the scenarios involve reductions in staff across grade levels and buildings. Scenario 1 also assumes that WIA does not continue. And I think this is an important and that about 50 to 60% of current WIA students would re-enter our brick and mortar schools. It is possible that if we discontinue WIA, we will lose some of the students enrolled there as families have other online options, such as the Washington Virtual Academy. But I have assumed in the scenario that 50 to 60% of the current students would enter our brick and mortar schools. If that does not happen, if we see less than half, for example, then this scenario would likely need to be adjusted to reduce at least an additional 2 teaching positions from the brick and mortar schools. And that's why I listed a range here, 75 to 77 positions. if the board decided to go with this option, this is what families who are currently enrolled in WIA might have for options. One option would be for students to return to a brick and mortar school. A second option would be for families in this scenario to consider enrollment in our existing Valley Academy of Learning program. Valley Academy is our existing K-8 alternative learning experience, or ALE program. And at Valley, students and parents work with staff to create a written student learning plan. And under that plan, parents and the district share in the responsibility to educate the student, which means Valley Academy functions under the guidelines of a WAC, WAC 392, 121, 182, that allows for a portion of an alternative learning experience to be provided by the school district and a portion of that learning experience to be provided by the student's parent or guardian. A third option would be for WIA students to enroll in a public online school outside the Wenatchee School District. The WAVA, or Washington Virtual Academy, would be one option. Federal Way Internet Academy would be another option. And should the board decide on this scenario, we will work to ensure families have all the information they need to understand the options and make the best choice for their students. Scenario 2, here the savings targets also get us over the 8 million mark over the 2 years. And we believe that this scenario would result in very similar savings amounts to what we saw in scenario 1. Both scenario 1 and scenario 2 require similar reductions in staffing levels as well, but they were built using different assumptions. The big difference in scenario 1 and scenario 2 is that in scenario 2, we're actively pursuing some alternative options to provide for families that are currently enrolled in WIA within the district. And I'll talk more about that in a moment. So here are staffing levels for scenario 2, again, nearly identical to the targeted savings and staffing levels as scenario 1, but there's that big difference in assumptions behind the scenario. So here are the assumptions behind this scenario, but both scenario 1 and scenario 2 assume we maintain a good portion of WIA's current enrollment, 50 to 60%. In scenario 1, we assume those students move back into a brick and mortar school. In this scenario, we assume they either move back into a brick and mortar school or into an existing ALE program where we would include some online options. So this scenario represents an attempt to provide students with an opportunity to continue with some online instruction by folding some online learning opportunities into one of our other existing programs. So again, that assumes that some of the current enrollment at WIA may shift into brick and mortar, and some of that would shift into a potential combo with one of our existing ALE programs. Here's a little more detail on that. So in scenario 2, families would still obviously have the brick and mortar option, but we would add 2 certificated staff members to our existing Valley Academy program. I mentioned Valley Academy is our parent partnership school. It's been supporting homeschool families with in-school or in-person instruction and at-home learning support for over 20 years. And during that time has been recognized as a school of distinction by OSPI. So the additional staff we would provide there would be used to create some online offerings as part of Valley Academy's current program. The online options would be available to all Valley Academy students and current WIA students, as well as really any student in the district or family. They would have the option to enroll in Valley's in-person classes as well. This option is not a school within a school. So in this scenario, WSD would no longer be offering a separate fully online school. But in this scenario, online offerings would be folded into Valley's current program. However, and I think this is a big however, over time, this option could allow us to potentially increase online offerings if enrollment permitted, and expand the online program. We do see the need for an option like this, especially at the middle school level, but also in the elementary as well, in the upper grades in particular. So scenario 2 is similar to scenario 1, but it represents a commitment to try and work towards a fiscally sustainable program that provides online offerings that could be expanded over time. In scenario 3, which is in this slide, here are the savings targets. Again, it gets us over the $8 million marker. Scenario 3 was created under the assumption that we continue WIA in its current form with the current staffing. Doing that has some impact on staffing in our brick and mortar schools. But I guess at this point, the point at this now, I guess, is to notice that all 3 of these scenarios include targets that get us over the $8 million marker. So in that sense, any of these scenarios are viable options for moving forward. The difference in scenario 3 and the others is, again, that assumption that we continue WIA in its current form and current staffing levels. We have assumed in this scenario that the enrollment at WIA slightly increases over the next 2 years. I used approximately 16 students per year or 32 students over the next 2 years. Even with that increase, we would still likely be a little overstaffed in WIA, which would result in the need to decrease an additional 4 to 5 staff from our brick and mortar schools over the 2-year period in order to get us over that $8 million savings target, which is why in this scenario, the total positions is 80.5, and in the others, it ranged from 75 to 77. And if the board chooses scenario 3, it's likely that families that are currently enrolled in WIA would stay put. They would still have, however, the options that we've listed in some of the other scenarios, brick and mortar or Valley Academy in its existing form, or other online options. So those things would still be available, but the difference is scenario 3 maintains WIA in its current form. So I began today with a reminder that behind all these tables and numbers are people, and that's students and families and staff. And we know that makes these decisions hard. My goal has been to ensure that the board has the best information I can provide based on our current understanding of budget parameters. As I've said, there are still many unknowns for us, including legislative impacts, but we're attempting to get in front of this in order to be as fair as possible to staff and families. So the next step for the board would be to select a scenario for the district to pursue. And once a scenario is selected, we will begin working on how it will play out in our system, which will likely result in the need for additional board input as we continue throughout the year. And I will also be working with our union leadership, the cabinet team, and our district leadership teams, the board budget committee, and others closely for the remainder of the year to move a budget plan forward. Are there any additional questions the board has at this point? I'll do the best I can to answer. And I may have to say I don't know.
I have comments, not
Okay, great.
necessarily questions. So the legislative impacts are unknown at this time. Is it not possible that could alleviate the need to make the drastic changes to WIA if those legislative impacts are in our favor?
There's some potential for that. The 4.5% and the rebase are big issues on the budget for legislative impacts. I have no way to predict where those are going to land, but if I were a betting person, I would guess it will be at least 4.5%, which will increase our staffing costs that plays in here. And I haven't put those factors in yet because I didn't know fully where they would be.
So that would hurt us or help us?
It might go the other way.
Yeah, okay, okay. So given that there are still some unknowns, what about the idea of continuing WIA for an additional year? I mean, what we've seen in the last few weeks that we've been looking at this is that the enrollment has actually increased by about 15 students, if I'm remembering the numbers correctly. Started with 48 or 49, and now we are at 63. And as has been pointed out, there has been no promotion, if you will, of the WIA program, and wondering if we could close that gap were we to give them a year with a little more publicity to increase enrollments. That's my next comment or question. You may respond or not, because I've got more. Okay.
I guess I would respond that could be represented by scenario 3.
Could be represented by scenario 3. Okay, gotcha. Okay, so as has also been pointed out, there are obligations of the district to provide appropriate education at public expense for special ed students, and that is reflected in our CW 28A and probably others. I know that as the historian, as I am sometimes referred to, we have had cases, at least one significant case in the past, where a special ed student didn't feel that the district was providing an appropriate education, and we ultimately were required to educate that student in another district and pay significantly more in the hundreds of thousands of dollar range to educate that student elsewhere and provide the familial support that that student needed to be successful. So I just, put that out there as an extreme, and not predicting that any of that is going to happen with the removal of WIA, but I believe that I have seen that it is possible, and that in actuality it has occurred in the past. And if you think about the extra supports that possibly could be needed for students returning to brick and mortar buildings where they have not been successful, in addition to the potential loss of enrollment, I am personally not convinced that removing WIA as an option for our student is going to be in the best interest of the district or of our students as a whole. Those are my comments.
I have a question in response to one of your comments. It's a question. So if we do increase the student enrollment, and I don't know if there's an answer, but if we were to increase the student enrollment, how would that impact the staffing? Because right now there's 63 students with 5 teachers. That's an average of 12 students per teacher. If with the enrollment of students, I'm assuming there's going to be an increase in staffing. Was that a correct assumption?
If enrollment increases, we would try and sustain it with current staffing to start with. Our current staffing levels at grades 2 and 3, for example, are about 27 students per teacher. Our current staffing levels in the middle school, when you look at the daily load for a middle school teacher, for example, they could have a class with 22 to 27 students for one class period. So they could see up to 80 students a day in the brick and mortar buildings. So we would try and allow some increase up to get to closer to those limits if we continue with WIA. Does that make sense? Does that answer your question?
Yes and no. I mean, if our enrollment is at 63, can't we do a reduction of staff?
At WIA? If we, the issue I think is when you reduce staff in that program, it makes it hard to maintain it in its current form.
Right,
Right.
okay, and I understand that. So how would adding more students and sustaining the same level of staff allow for that same model to continue?
There, I think you're asking two different ends. If the student enrollment increases, we could bear more students with current staffing. So I would allow current staffing to be established and see if we can increase the enrollment. If enrollment doesn't increase and I have to remove staff, it impacts their ability to run the program in the way that it's currently run. For example, they have an ELA teacher, a math science, and those are at the middle school level where it becomes more difficult for a single teacher to do all of the subjects.
That makes sense.
So I have a question about the staffing. When you mentioned we might lose 5 more positions in the schools if we retain WIA in its current form, is that measured by FTE? So 1 FTE, which could be 2 to 3 additional positions. So really, we're saying we'll lose 4 positions. We're actually losing maybe 8, depending on FTE level.
It's a number carried forward over 2 years. So right now, WIA numbers wise is overstaffed by about 2.5 maybe staff. And so that 2.5 to get us to the 8 million target, that 2.5 amount would have to come out of the brick and mortar system 2 years in a row.
Right.
And that's where it ends up being 4 to 5 over the
But 4 to 5
years.
full FTE, which could be 8 actual
Te-
positions.
teaching position.
Yes.
No, it's the 4 to 5 FTE would be teaching positions. And so that would be 4 to 5 teachers. Okay. Yeah, not 8.
I do have another set of comments. I personally do not have an adequate understanding of the needs of the students that are most benefited by WIA. We've heard Max Meyer's family, and we've gotten many emails from other folks expressing their concerns, but none of us, I don't think, have the personal experience of living day to day with a child who is atypical. I think if we do need to make a modification to WIA, that it is imperative that the current teaching staff and the parents involved are embraced and brought in to craft the solution for an alternative to be successful. It's my understanding that for at least some of them, Valley Academy has been pursued, and for whatever reason, it wasn't a viable option. And it's not for me to say, or I think any of us here to say, well, just make it work. And, other people have done it. Why can't you? I know that kind of thinking has caused a lot of problems in our world. And so I just think it's imperative that the current teaching staff who do have that understanding and the parents are involved in developing the solution that is most likely to succeed. And one other comment, you talked about the staff and a coach and various office admins. I'm wondering if we could help out by making a change to the coaching position for that school, if that would provide a benefit to the budget.
That's potential. So when I showed the staffing levels on the slide earlier, I showed just the 5 teachers, but there is a coach and some ancillary support there as well.
I like the idea of having the staff and the parents involved in, say, a modified version, whether it's a combination with Valley. So you mentioned that 2 additional staff would be open for Valley online hybrid program, I guess. And all students enrolled at Valley would have access to this. In regards to what Laura said, is there a way we can give priority to WIA families before opening it up to all Valley students? Because 2 staff, I mean, it doesn't seem like a lot, honestly. And if we're going to try to work with families that are being displaced through a modification of WIA, can we prioritize our families, the students?
I think Valley Academy is starting their registration process later in March, so tail end of March. Is that correct, Dr. Kalahar? Yeah, so there's some potential that we could do that. We can get in front of their registration process and get this moving.
Can I ask a question? Scenario 1 and scenario 2 seem they are the exact same numbers, the exact same results. I'm not, other than moving it out of, eliminating it altogether, and then the scenario 2 is the option of moving it to Valley Academy. Am I correct in that statement that the numbers are?
Yes,
exactly
they're this there's a little bit different in the number of staff per year, but overall it's the same result. And that was an attempt to look at where the students shifted. In scenario 1, we would have to assume that 50 to 60% come back into the brick and mortar system to get those numbers. Which right now, if you looked at the current enrollment, there's 63 students, and 14 of those are 8th graders who will be moving out of the program. So that leaves, 45-ish or so, and 50 to 60%, then we would try and get back into the brick and mortar in scenario 1. In scenario 2, I made the same assumption that we could recover 50 to 60% of those in either some in the brick and mortar and some in this Valley Academy combo. And that's the difference, is where we would recover. And in both of those scenarios, there's a difference in staffing levels, pending we may not get 50 to 60% of the WIA students moving back into either of those options, which would increase the number of staff that would need to be reduced over the 2-year period. Did that answer your question?
Oh, yeah. I'm looking at the numbers there. Exactly the same. Where are you saying the staff would be reduced?
Difference is in the detail on this sheet of where the numbers are reduced. In scenario 2, we are looking at 41 staff members in year 1, 34 and a half in year 2. That's a little bit different in scenario 1 and 2. But overall, we feel like we could do either of those scenarios in a cost neutral way. They would both cost about the same and lead to the same savings.
Do we have any better idea of how many people are expected to retire in this coming year?
Additional retirements, I don't know yet. We did have incentives November through January, but there are always still people in the system who could retire at any time. At this time, I believe I listed it earlier. Let me go back to that slide. I think there are 12 CERT staff that I'm aware of and 9 classified staff. And again, how the openings created by those retirements play out in the process depends on factors like whether or not those the openings created by those retirements are positions that we must replace. For example, some of those retirements are principals, and we're going to replace the building principals. But there are potentially some retirements where we may be able to absorb the position or fill it from within using current staff.
Bill, do we know the financial impact if the legislature does not fund any of the increases?
Do you mean if they don't do any of the IPD?
Well, if they do the IPD increase of 4.5%, what is that impact on the district?
Overall fiscal, I don't know that number right offhand.
Because it could have a big implication. And that's over 1 or 2 years, or is it the biennium or?
If it's a biennium, so it's the IPD is they budget for 2 years. Is that correct? I'm looking at our union representative. Right. And I will speak it so people who are watching online can hear, but go ahead. Yes.
$100%? Okay.
Yes. That's correct. So if you're watching online, what our union president for the Wenatchee just shared about the 4.5 IPD, it is part of the prototypical school funding model for staff that are covered under the prototypical school funding model. The difference for us as a district then will be we have lots of staff that are over and above the prototypical school model, and we will have to fund those staff out of other sources, for example, levy dollars, et cetera.
And last time we visited that prototypical school model, it's been a while, but it seemed like the district was a little based on the model. Not saying that's accurate based on the need of the district, but we were pretty overstaffed. Is that correct?
I was holding back because I think that this decision and recommendation has to be taken globally, looking at the whole picture. And so when I speak, I really want to take that balanced overview, because I think without it, you don't necessarily see accurately. But there are 3 things that I think touch on right now that are relevant to everything we've done. We focused on how many FTE positions get changed. People are at the core of this, students, families, and teachers. That's true. But a reduction in FTEs is also a reduction in services of education to students. It's not just an employment factor. It's what every student in this district receives. So that's an important thing to think about. The second thing is I applaud what everybody said about really paying personal attention if we look at scenario 2 and creating alternatives. And I'm just going to look at something I was going to include in an overview, but I think it fits in now. If you listen to the described history of current WI students, there seems to be, it seems to be of support systems that sometimes worked, but often did not, okay? I trust the district, if they need to create alternatives, to really implement individual attention and assistance to every WIA student and family to navigate to the best fit alternatives that we've got in the next year. And I think that's really important. It may not be WIA, but the individual attention is real. And then my next point, I think, feeds into something else. We're talking about uncertainty. This is the end of February. The final budget is approved in August. There's a lot of change that can happen with relatively modest changes, but it could be quite significant in that period. At the same time, when the superintendent is talking about scenarios 1, 2, 3, and scenario 2, some of those alternatives are being built in real time between now and August. And I think we should not underestimate creativity in doing things. Also, the hazard of not being able to do what we want to do. Questions have been asked like, what happens if more, how to give priority if we're allowed to. I'm not sure what the registration rules are that we have to abide by for creating a different program. And I want to talk more about that globally later on at Valley, that I think there's the ability to actually adapt and adjust to circumstances and to demand that's not zero. It's not a problem-solving one, but it's not zero. So those three things that we're talking about: services going to different parts of the school district, that we're talking about individual attention that's super, super important to do everything that we can. And I really believe, no matter what people's past experience is, that we, all of us together, the board will support the district will support teachers, that we are going to do whatever we can. It may not be what people want, and do that individual attention, and that there is adaptation, creativity to some limited extent in the process time from now to August. I think all those things are really important.
Thank you. Any further questions for Superintendent Eagle?
Just one more comment. So 2 comments really. One is I wish it wasn't this hard for families of special ed students or students in need of alternative learning to have access to education. I feel very badly about that for the families who are in a panic mode right now because they are uncertain of the future of their student and their family life, because it will potentially drastically change. And the other just comment is, you know, when we started Westside High School years ago, there was no other alternative learning program available. And now we have this thriving program that is serving students with unique needs who don't find success in the traditional school model. It's not online, but it's not unlike that. We do have Valley Academy for homeschool families, and maybe that can morph into something else. But for the rest of our student body, K through 8, we do not have a readily available alternative learning program. And I think that as a district in the long run, we really need that.
I'll just one more comment. It makes me very happy that we were able to find a fairly successful model in what was created for response to the pandemic, and then has really started to meet the needs of some of our students and family. To the extent it's not financially sound to operate in its current form, I hope that some of the families, that the district's going to commit to working with them, but that maybe some of what they've learned through their school experience on WIA can be implemented more in the classroom. Because I think even if we kept WIA as it is, the scenario is a little unrealistic to the extent it requires an enrollment increase, which we're just not seeing. And we could go advertise and maybe get a little bit of traction for a while. But I don't know that that's a long-term increase that is feasible to sustain the program. But I think also if we're looking at this in terms of we're going to increase class sizes there, that might decrease the level of service you've been accustomed to and seeing there. So it still could result in changes in that program or capacity. So I'm hopeful that maybe we find that happy medium in one of these other scenarios. I think it is important that we provide the best service possible, but I struggle with the cuts necessary to sustain that model to the impacts that could be felt elsewhere in the district as well. So it's not an enviable decision by any means. I am so thankful for the advocacy we've received for the program. I wish it would translate 1-for-1 on enrollment so that this was an easier decision. And for everyone supporting the kids that are advocating on their behalf, I think you're incredible, and keep doing that, and we'll listen and try to help everyone as much as we can.
we've been saying for months, ever since on our fortunate budget incident, we have been saying for months, this is going to be so hard. This is going to be so hard. We're about to have to do really, really hard stuff, really hard decisions. And I mean, everybody has said that. We have been talking about that in the public, with the public, and in particular with our search for a new superintendent. I mean, hundreds of times we've heard it, and we've heard it from everybody. And so now here we are. Here's the first really hard, awful, devastating to some decision. But we're not in a financial blip or a financial, semi-bad time. We are in a crisis, a financial crisis. I mean, a number that gets spoken out in the public again and again, and it is not a little number. It is a crazy, huge number. So as an elected board member, it's almost dereliction of duty or malfeasance to not properly do our best to remedy this terrible budget crisis that we're in. That's my kind of instinct. And in the same vein as Laura is talking about, and Martin, and my next instinct is, okay, I'll sit here in the district every day with every family that needs help finding their solution to us having to eliminate WIA. That's my next instinct, because I have a child in a school district. I understand wanting the very best for your child, and I admire and praise you for your advocacy for your child. It's been really amazing to see. So I'm stuck between those two issues. And then again, so I'm encouraged to see the scenario that you're presenting with WIA through Valley Academy. And I also, I spent the weekend at the legislative conference with hundreds of other board members from all across the state, and talking about these kinds of things and wanting and advocating with our legislators at the Capitol for the money that we need. And in particular, at this session, for special education and for transportation are the two things that hundreds and hundreds of board members all met in the Capitol to call our legislators out of session and they trained us. Okay, this is how you need to talk to them, and this is what you need to say, and you need to say it in a few minutes, because we really have to drive our point home and get them to do what we want them to do. So I'm right in the thick of it, and I feel that, but I also understand from talking with those board members for several days that we do have, as you were stating, out of district services and options that are used across the state by different school districts. And so knowing the crisis that we're in, and that there are other options, and that maybe just as a district, we're not ready to continue with WIA right now. That is what the thoughts that I have been thinking about all weekend and in preparation for this. Again, my first instinct is we're in a budget crisis. All right, we have tough decisions, hard decisions to make. And after saying parents of kids, we're going to have to cut this. Next, we're going to have to sit with the employees and fathers of families and say, you don't have a job anymore, and now you need to find something to do to support your family. Those are the decisions that are coming up next. And as we've been saying forever, or for several months, this is tough stuff. This is hard. It is really hard. And it's not, each decision is not going, it's going to make someone very unhappy and change their life forever. So again, my second instinct is I will sit here every day that it takes to help each student that needs advocacy, and to do my part and what I can, and to remedy and help with what these kids will need.
Just one of my last points is that, the work doesn't stop here. Choosing a scenario as we move forward, it doesn't stop. So, I'm asking my colleagues, the admin team, the next superintendent, that we work together to find innovative ways to manage, to better manage our schools, our benefits, our contract, non-instructional services, to hopefully reduce the deficit even further for next year, and create systems in place so that we're not in this situation again. It's very unfortunate that that we are actually having these conversations now, when if we had systems in place, it could have been prevented. If there's no further discussion, I'll entertain a motion.
I am willing to move that the board select scenario 2 for budget planning, and then we can, if there is a second, then we can discuss it.
Second.
Thank you. We have a motion by Martin Barron and a second by Julie. Any further discussion?
I'm going to vote no on the motion, and the reason is because I don't feel comfortable that we have an adequate solution in any of the 3 scenarios to serve the students, the high need students at WIA.
Thank you. Any further discussion? Martin?
I wanted to speak up as an individual board member and the one who made the motion with my overview. Much of it is going to tread the same pathway that the superintendent gave in explaining the 3 alternatives. I apologize for that, but I think to me it's important to look at the whole thing. That's how I think about it, and hopefully it will help a little bit. And the reason for doing that is that the board's received and read an exceptional number of emails advocating for WIA. They have been reasoned and they have been respectful, and I appreciate that. And I'll say again, it's difficult and it's human, and yes, we have to do it. So what are the basic premises that I use looking at this? Education is investment. And I am prepared to accept well thought out risks in order to achieve the benefits over time. So there's risks and there's not instantaneous in that. The board has responsibility for the public purse. That's ours. The board and district are accountable for allocating shares of limited resources equitably to all students, those who may be represented and those whose voice may not be being heard. It is all students of all kinds. There is no question, at least in my mind, there's no question, that WIA has delivered excellent education to those students who attend, including innovative methods that are helpful to particular needs. That is not at discussion. It's what we do about it. One of Wenatchee School District's greatest strengths is its diversity in delivering education, an alternative high school. And Laura correctly says it took a decade to get that right. A technical skills center that serves the region, not just our school district. A homeschool academy that I didn't realize had won awards until tonight. And using temporary pandemic funds, created the Internet Academy. I personally had hoped that enrollment of, say, 150 plus students at WIA would result in this district having another viable long-term alternative institution. But I don't think this is the situation we face. And we're talking about an enrollment that's gone from 50-ish to a little over 60, and talking about 80 as doing financial modeling. But really, you can't be skimping along right at that to have a viable institution. And I'm not an educator, maybe 150 is wrong, but I think that you're going to need to have something that has that kind of threshold to drive year after year and get improvement. So what are we going to do? And this is where taking what I call well thought out risk enters the scenario. And I'm going to leap to one thing. I also thought about delaying for a year, and I brought it up on the board budget committee. And look, what did I write down? Don't delay, rework. I know it's tough for the students and families in the middle, but I think we're going to do better in the long run if we rework. And that's what scenario 2 is. It's uncertain and it's taking a risk, but it's taking the right kind of risk to work there. I don't think, that's me, that the status quo is fiscally sustainable. So what the rework, if I call it now, I didn't have that in my notes, I just added that word. Is there a way to capture the innovative and high quality benefits that are provided by WIA in a form that will become viable? I said before, the road's uncertain. It's going to need to be one of development with unknown answers as of today. I do support the investment pathway of scenario 2, and it goes down that road. And that's why I said we have now to August to maybe achieve more than we can dream of on February the 28th. It does respond, imperfectly I acknowledge, to the reasons expressed by the advocates for WIA. But it asks that we work together in the hope that a more effective way of delivering the characteristics of today's WIA will be achieved. And then I wanted to address a couple of points raised in public comments, and the one about off on things that didn't work in the past I already talked about. Can grant or other funding be found? That's a very good question that was asked in one of the emails. Again, as of February 28th, you can go on a wing and a prayer, or you can say, if we go for scenario 2, let's see what we can do in the longer term. And so that's my overview, the rationale for why I proposed the motion.
Thank you, Martin. Any further discussion?
Yes, sorry. It's one thing to talk about the bottom line, but it's another thing to talk about real people and students. Equity means that we provide what each student needs to achieve their academic success. It doesn't mean providing equal dollars to each student.
And for me, in regards to looking at the data and the numbers, I think it's just not sustainable to continue a program that is currently in a deficit. I am confident. I want to be confident that scenario 2, which creates a hybrid model for our families in front of us, as well as virtually and everyone enrolled in WIA, that will the district under the leadership of Superintendent Eagle will provide some of the services needed to fulfill that promise. Our promise for our students that this decision is impacting the most. Yes, it's going to look different, but I'm hoping this is all just like we initiated WIA in a time of need, that this hybrid program, I call it hybrid because lack of better words, grows to be what WIA once was, and it could be sustainable. And for that reason, I'm supporting scenario 2 as well.
Yeah, I'll just tag on to that and say that I think this is the opportunity for these students and families that are so impacted by this decision to really work with our district in making scenario 2 the best option. Something that we can only dream of right now, potentially, but like Martin said, we still have the time. But I agree, it's not sustainable in its current form, and the potential loss of resources to other students throughout the district over time is also staggering. And so I'm keeping that in mind as we're balancing the equities of this discussion. So I'm hopeful that scenario 2 will find that balance where we can work with some of these families to develop the program that they may need to help go forward. It may not look exactly like it does now, but hopefully we're meeting them in the needs and still meeting the needs of other students in the district.
Thank you, everyone. We have a motion and it has been seconded. At this time, all in favor of adopting scenario 2, please say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed?
Aye.
The motion carries. Next on the agenda is our board communication, not superintendent report.
A report.
Okay, so we'll switch those around. We'll go with superintendent report first.
Okay, I would like to start by thanking everyone who took the time to comment during our citizens comment section of this agenda, and those who've provided email feedback to the board throughout this process. I greatly appreciate that. And I appreciate the board's thoughtfulness in discussions. We have some difficult decisions ahead of us as well. I was able to attend the Jazz Nights concert last Friday evening, and it was a great showcase. Our students provided a wonderful evening of music with the professional musicians, and I'm proud to serve in a district that supports music and the arts in that way. Many thanks to our jazz band instructors, Aaron Luber, Angela Richmond, Jeff Sandberg Jr., and Jim Kovac for their work, and Marianne Coleman for her work in putting that event on. It's a lot of work, but it was a great event for our students and for our community. Our elementary schools across the district participated in a Math is Cool competition on February 24th at Foothills Middle School. I wanted to congratulate all the competitors, the coaches and volunteers that participated and made that event happen. It's exciting to see so many students participating in that program, which is part of our after-school program at the middle school level. On February 10th, the Washington State House of Representatives recognized the Wenatchee High School football team for their achievement as the 4A academic champions with an official resolution. So congratulations to the team, and thank you to the 12th district representatives, Mike Steele and Keith Gaynor, for championing that action in support of our student athletes. I did also want to mention today, we hosted another math learning lab at Lincoln Elementary. This is an ongoing job embedded professional development opportunity for our staff, where they engage in collaboratively creating a plan for a lesson, implementing and analyzing a lesson in mathematics, and that culminates with some future planning for instruction. So it's a great way to do professional development in the job embedded framework. And as the board wraps up the superintendent search process this week, I want to assure you that I and the cabinet team will work diligently to ensure the success of Wenatchee's next superintendent. I am starting to realize that I only have 4 months left and a lot more that I hope to accomplish in that time frame. I will be working hard to finish strong as your interim superintendent, and I have appreciated the opportunity to serve again in the Wenatchee School District. And that is my report.
Thank you. Board communication.
Ditto on the jazz night. My husband and I attended on Saturday night and it was wonderful. Very much appreciated the talent of the professional musicians and the students especially. Very impressive. Also, just wanted to remind everybody, just in case you didn't sign up, to read books on Dr. Seuss's birthday, March 2nd at Columbia School. I'm sure you have an email in your inbox, so I'll be there. Hopefully some of you will be too.
My shout out for this meeting is to PTAs. I thoroughly enjoyed going to see the Missoula Children's Theater production at Lincoln of The Jungle Book. They're a traveling troupe, and just 2 people, 1 director, 1 actor, who I don't know how long they had with the students. They had 40 or 50 of them acting, complete with costumes, scenery and everything else. And the poor actor kept on having to get their words, but it was really wonderful. And it was good to see them some of them gaining confidence, other of them still very timid. It was great to see that at Lincoln. That was a PTA sponsored event. And actually over the years, I have a great respect for many PTAs, but Lincoln in particular, I've enjoyed. And then I didn't have anything to do with this except read in the newspaper, but the PTA at Sunny Slope had a passport day where people learned a bit of geography. As a naturalized citizen, who got educated elsewhere, I've always been bewildered at the fact that geography isn't a real subject in our schools. And so I think it's really good if we Americans learn a lot about geography of the whole world. Those are 2 PTA things. I think that's really great. And then just a quick thing, different things happen in schools. I happened to be in Pioneer doing a visit when the Association of Washington Student Leaders were giving a workshop to about 50 middle school students in the gym, rather like we most commonly do with high school kids, of leadership. I had no idea that it was going to happen. It was there, but that kind of thing happens in the school district. So be aware of how much work I think the community does, helping to sponsor it, the teachers and the staff and the schools do.
Well, as I was saying earlier, this last weekend, I attended the legislative conference and Day on the Hill, presented by or organized by WASDA, and WASBO. Really, as the new ledge rep, didn't know what to expect, but I went in and I was really very pleasantly surprised. As I said, there were hundreds of school directors there, but also administrators and business officers are also there, and they kind of collectively, as you might remember, as a school board, we kind of prioritized what was important in our district and kind of a top 10 that Julie presented, and then that's kind of brought together from all school districts, and then this group collaboratively decides what they're really going to focus on, particularly on this day. And it was kind of not knowing what to expect in the time where the speaker spoke to us. It was, again, to say, okay, this is how you advocate for these things that we're focused on this year, and here's what they are. And I want to start with, just really quickly, something that I thought was so interesting, and it was the legislative hot topics. The public education system is named in the state constitution as Washington's paramount duty. No other system has the same designation. School directors and administrators continue to advocate for public education while supporting and elevating the staff that enables it to exist and thrive. And while our system continues to support students and families in unique and innovative ways, as exemplified during the pandemic, it's also severely strained. Despite our staff being exhausted, we persist in providing a fair and free public education to over 1.1 million students. However, we are desperate for the resources to improve the outcomes for each and every student in our system, and we are relying on the legislature to help us do so. I just thought that was really stunning, that in the Washington State Constitution, that is the paramount duty, and no other duty has that same designation. So there was a lot of discussion about how funding has decreased in the state of Washington compared to what it has been in the past. And the two things that they decided to focus on was fully funding special education services and to fix pupil transportation. So again, those were the things that we were kind of coached on. And then on Monday morning, we went into the Capitol, which is a stunning building. If you have never been, I had never been to Olympia at all. But really beautiful. And as our districts broke down, we got to meet with our legislators, and the two that we met with were Keith Gaynor and Mike Steele. And they were very receptive, and we had students that spoke with them, and school board directors, superintendents from all over the state. And they were very, as I said, receptive and working hard to get the things that our district needs. So that was a really great experience, and I'm very, very glad I went. Also, spring sports, they've started, tennis in particular. And so if you have a child who is interested in a spring sport, get them out there. There are so many opportunities to take advantage of, and really going back in full swing. So
I guess speaking of sports, Special Olympics is still looking for lots of volunteers. So if you've got some free time, I think it's this weekend. There's multiple places you can sign up to help out with the great activity and support a lot of our local student athletes. So
For me, it's just adding on to the elementary math school competition over last Friday. Thank you to all our staff volunteers, but also to our parents. I know there was a couple teams that didn't have a staff volunteer, so parents stepped in and helped out with those. Kudos to Washington Elementary, but moving on to state. And there might be other elementaries, but I'm not aware of. So kudos to those schools if they did. And then just briefly, I think we all received an email from our District 7 legislative representative. I have reached, are you, Whitney Smith? Yeah. I reached out to her because I have questions about OPMA, the agenda, and I haven't heard back. So once I hear back from her, I will share it with Kim to share out to the rest of the board. That's it for me. Anything else for the good of the order? Right. At this time, this meeting is adjourned.